The white dress was soaked in blood before I ever made it to the altar. I remember the exact moment I realized I was dying. Not the sharp pain of the blade sliding between my ribs. Not the sound of the crowd screaming. Not even the way my knees buckled and the marble floor rushed up to meet me. What I remember is Noah's face. The way his eyes found mine across the cathedral. The exact second the joy drained out of them, and something ancient and savage took its place. And Alpha's howl tore out of him, raw, broken, the kind of sound that shook the stained glass in its frames. And it was the last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me whole. I died on my wedding day. And then I woke up 5 years before it happened. Part 1. The girl who remembered everything. The ceiling of my childhood bedroom was the first thing I saw. The crack in the plaster shaped like a river. The water stain in the corner I'd spent hours staring at during thunderstorms. The faded glow stars my younger sister Petra had stuck up there when we were kids. The ones I'd never bothered peeling down, because I thought they were sweet. I sat up so fast the room spun. My hands were wrong. Not wrong exactly. They were young, unmarked. The thin white scar on my left palm from the ceremonial bonding cut wasn't there. The calluses from 5 years of weapons training were gone. I pressed my fingers together, feeling the smooth skin, and a sound escaped me that wasn't quite a word. Elena, my mother's voice drifted up through the floorboards. Breakfast is ready. I didn't move for a full minute. My name was Elena Voss, 22 years old, unbonded, unmated, and apparently, inexplicably, impossibly alive, sitting in the bedroom I'd grown up in at the edge of the Silverwood Pack's territory. In a version of the world that existed 5 years before my death, I knew the exact date without checking. September 3rd. The morning of the autumn gathering, when all the unmated wolves in the 3 allied packs would come together at the Silverwood estate for the season's first formal meeting. The morning I first laid eyes on Noah Blackthorn, Alpha of Silverwood, and thought he was the most insufferably arrogant man I'd ever met. The morning everything began. I got out of bed slowly, like the floor might give way beneath me. The mirror above my dresser showed me a face I'd almost forgotten, rounder, softer, without the shadows that 5 years of life had carved beneath my eyes. I looked young. I looked rested. I looked like someone who didn't know that a blade was coming for her at the end of this road. But I did know. And that meant everything was different now. I pressed my hand flat against the mirror's cool surface and stared at my own reflection, until my breathing steadied. Then I started going through what I knew. I had been killed on my wedding day, the morning of October 15th, 5 years from now, inside the Grand Cathedral at Silverwood Estate. Noah and I had been bonded for 3 years by then. I was 27, and I was supposed to be the happiest woman alive, and someone I trusted had driven a silver-tipped blade into my back before I could reach the altar. I had never seen their face. The blow came from behind. The angle suggested someone standing close enough to be in the wedding party itself. Close enough to be considered family. 6 people were standing within striking distance when I fell. Noah's younger brother, Cole. His beta Marcus. My best friend and maid of honor, Daria. The pack's head elder, Ajahn. My sister Petra. And Noah's personal guard, a wolf named Sable who had been with him since childhood. One of those 6 people had murdered me in a white dress in front of 200 witnesses, in the moment I was supposed to be untouchable, and Alpha's mate on her bonding day, protected by pack law and ancient ritual alike. One of them had decided I needed to die badly enough to commit the most sacred violation a pack wolf could perform. I needed to know who. And I needed to know why. I pulled on clothes without thinking, my fingers working on autopilot while my mind sorted through 5 years of memories like a deck of cards, looking for the edge I'd missed. The tell I'd overlooked, the moment I should have seen coming and hadn't. The problem was that I loved all 6 of them. The autumn gathering was held on the eastern lawn of the Silverwood estate, under strings of amber lights and the enormous old oaks that gave the territory its name. Trestle tables stretched the length of a football field. Pack members moved between them in their best clothes, carrying plates and laughing, and the whole scene had a warmth to it that pressed against my ribs like a bruise. I knew how this day was supposed to go. I'd arrive with my family. My mother would spend the first hour networking with the other pack mothers, trying to identify eligible males for me and for Petra. Petra would disappear almost immediately, gravitating toward the younger wolves like a magnet. I would stand near the dessert table feeling mildly awkward, and then Cole Blackthorn would materialize at my shoulder and start talking to me about the honey cakes, of all things, and then he'd drag me across the lawn to introduce me to his brother. Noah would be in the middle of a conversation he was trying to escape. He'd turn to greet me with relief, and then the relief would shift into something more careful when our eyes met. He'd offer me his hand. I'd shake it. And the first words he'd ever say to me would be, "You look like someone who's already decided they don't want to be here." And I'd say, "Is it that obvious?" And he'd say, "Only to someone who feels the same way." And that would be that. The beginning of everything. I walked through the gathering with my pulse in my throat, seeing faces I recognized and some I'd forgotten. Pack members who would become important to me over the years. Children who would grow up. Elders who would pass away. The weight of knowing was enormous. Not just the grief of my own death, but the grief of all the ordinary time I'd lost, the ordinary moments I hadn't known to hold onto. I found the dessert table, waited. Cole appeared exactly on schedule, materializing at my left elbow with a plate already loaded with honey cakes and a grin that hadn't changed in 5 years. He was 20 then, younger than I remembered him, his face not yet settled into the sharper lines it would develop. But the energy was identical. Cole Blackthorn moved through the world like he expected it to accommodate him, not with arrogance, but with a breezy certainty that was almost infectious. Could he have killed me? I watched him from the corner of my eye as he offered me the plate and launched into an enthusiastic monologue about the honey cake recipe, and I tried to make the image fit. Cole, who had cried at our bonding ceremony. Cole, who had taken my side in every argument I'd ever had with Noah about pack protocol. Cole, who had called me his sister long before I was officially anything to him. I couldn't make it fit. But I also knew that was exactly what a good killer would count on. "You're very quiet," Cole observed. "Do you not like honey cake? Because if you don't like honey cake, I'm afraid we can't be friends." "I like honey cake," I said, and my voice came out almost normal. "Excellent." He beamed. "Come on, I want to introduce you to someone. He's been standing over there looking miserable for 20 minutes and he needs rescuing." I followed Cole across the lawn. And there was Noah. Part 2, the Alpha I already loved. He was exactly as I remembered him, and somehow that was the cruelest thing of all. 25 years old. Dark hair, dark eyes, the particular quality of stillness that came from being the highest-ranked wolf in 3 territories, that sense of compressed power, like a storm that had decided to wear a suit. He was standing with Elder Ajin, who was doing most of the talking, and the expression on Noah's face was the one I had come to know intimately over 5 years, patient, attentive, and completely concealing the fact that he desperately wanted to be somewhere else. He turned when Cole called his name. His eyes found mine. I knew what he saw, a girl he'd never met, with dark hair and a slightly overwhelmed expression, holding a honey cake she hadn't taken a bite of. A stranger. That's all I was to him in this moment. A stranger at a gathering, one of dozens he'd shake hands with today. He didn't know yet. He didn't know anything yet. "Noah, this is Elena Voss," Cole said. "Elena, my brother Noah. He's the Alpha, which he'll absolutely try not to mention, so I'm mentioning it for him." Noah's mouth curved slightly. He extended his hand. "You look like someone who's already decided they don't want to be here," he said. My chest cracked open like a fault line. I shook his hand. His grip was warm and firm, and the contact sent a current through me that had nothing to do with mate bond electricity and everything to do with the pure, devastating familiarity of touching a person you've loved for years who doesn't remember you at all. Is it that obvious? I said. Only to someone who feels the same way. He smiled at me, the real one, the one he didn't give to most people, slightly crooked, reaching all the way to his eyes. And I smiled back, and the gathering buzzed around us, and Cole said something triumphant about introductions, and I was standing at the beginning of the story already knowing the ending. The question was whether I could change it. I spent the rest of that first day watching. I watched Noah, cataloging the things I'd once taken for granted, the way he stood closer to people he actually trusted. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when something was bothering him that he hadn't decided whether to share yet. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't looking back, with a considering expression, as though I were a problem he found interesting. I watched Cole, bright and easy and present, and tried to find the shadow in him and couldn't. I watched Marcus when he arrived late in the afternoon, tall, careful, Noah's beta and oldest friend, built like a door and about as expressive. Marcus had always been difficult to read. He had been one of the people I trusted most in the world. He had also, I was now forced to acknowledge, possessed both the skill and the access to put a blade in my back without being noticed until it was too late. I watched Daria, my best friend since childhood, laughing with a group of younger pack women across the lawn. Daria, who had wrapped me in my wedding dress that morning. Daria, who had been crying before the ceremony even started, which I had attributed to sentiment, and now I had to wonder. I watched elder Ajahn, 70 years old and sharp as a winter wind, moving through the gathering like someone conducting an invisible orchestra. Ajahn had never liked me. I'd always known that. Had always attributed it to old-fashioned bias against mated alphas choosing partners from smaller families. Now I turned the dislike over in my mind and looked at it from different angles. I watched Sable from across the lawn, lean and quiet, always positioned to see every exit, loyal to Noah with a ferocity that had always reminded me of a wolf guarding something fragile. What would Sable protect so fiercely that she'd commit the unthinkable to preserve it? By sunset, I had more questions than I'd started with and no answers at all. But I had something more important than answers. I had time. Part 3. 5 years of knowing the second time through was nothing like the first. The first time, I had been a girl falling in love, stumbling forward through a life she hadn't expected, grateful for every good thing and blindsided by every hard one. I had been reactive. I had been trusting. I had kept my walls down because Noah had asked me to, because he'd said once, quietly, that I was the only person he'd ever met who made him feel like the alpha was something he wore and not something he was, and that had undone me so completely that I'd let myself stop looking for danger. The second time, I paid attention to everything. The courtship between Noah and me moved along its familiar tracks, but I navigated it differently now. I let him in. I couldn't not let him in. I loved him with something that felt geological, deep and formed under pressure, but I watched the people around us with a new and merciless clarity. I was looking for motive. In the first months, I focused on opportunity. Who had access to information about my movements? Who had been present during early encounters with Noah that might have established a pattern of jealousy or grievance? Cole had no motive I could find. He was genuinely delighted by his brother's happiness, and the warmth between Cole and me developed exactly as it had the first time, easy and uncomplicated. I crossed him off my list reluctantly, knowing I could be wrong, keeping one eye on him always. Marcus was harder to read the second time than he'd been the first, because now I was looking for things I hadn't been looking for before. I noticed that Marcus watched Noah's relationships with a certain vigilance, not jealousy, exactly. More like guardianship. like someone who had appointed himself the protector of something precious and measured every new variable against the question of whether it posed a risk. Did he see me as a risk? I found my answer 18 months in. Noah and I were fighting. We fought sometimes, both of us stubborn as stones. And this particular argument was about pack politics I no longer cared about, and I left the estate in a bad temper and elk to the river by myself to think. Marcus found me there an hour later. He sat down on the bank without asking, and we didn't speak for a while, and then he said, very carefully, "He's never been this exposed before." Exposed, I said. "You're his weakness," Marcus said. "I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that he would do anything for you. A beta protects the alpha. I need to know you're not going to use that." I stared at him for a long moment. "I'm going to protect him too," I said. "That's the same job, Marcus. We just have different positions." Something shifted in Marcus's face. Not resolved, he was too careful for that, but loosened. Like a not given slack. I crossed him off my list. Not Sable. Not yet. Sable was the one who gave me the most trouble. She was present everywhere without being intrusive, silent in a way that made her hard to track across a room. She had been with Noah since before he was Alpha, since the dangerous years when his father's pack was fracturing and Noah was holding it together with will and strategy, and the occasional brutal enforcement of consequences. Sable had been his shadow through all of it. And she didn't like me. Not the way Ajin didn't like me. Ajin's dislike had the flavor of snobbery. Sable's was different. Sable looked at me sometimes with an expression I couldn't name, something between hunger and grief. And then it would close off and she'd be unreadable again. The realization came to me in year 3, at a pack ceremony where Sable stood behind Noah, and I caught her watching me with that expression again, and I finally understood what it was. She was in love with him. She had been in love with him for years, possibly decades, and she had made peace with it, had built her entire life around the proximity that being his guard afforded her. And then I had walked in and changed the equation. I hadn't replaced her at his side, nothing would replace Sable there, but I had taken something she'd never had and didn't let herself want. And the grief in her face was the grief of someone watching through a window. I took her off my list. Not because people didn't kill for love. They did, constantly, but because Sable's love for Noah was the kind that wanted him whole. And losing me on our wedding day would break him. She knew that. Anyone who'd watched him for 5 minutes knew that. Whatever Sable felt for me, it wasn't murder. That left Daria, Elder Ajin, and Petra. And I did not want it to be any of them. Part 4. The truth that was hiding in plain sight. I almost missed it because it didn't look like a motive. It looked like kindness. Elder Ajin had been pushing, for years, a particular interpretation of pack law, one that held that a bonded alpha's mate, if not a born wolf of equivalent status, was a political liability. He'd never said it to my face. He was too smart for that. But I heard it in the way he framed his counsel, the way he positioned the bonds of pack hierarchy against the bonds of mated love. The way he consistently proposed policies that would have the effect of reducing my role and my influence. I had dismissed it before as politics, as the maneuvering of an old man who didn't want the world to change. In year 4 of my second life, I started listening to Ajin differently. I started attending the elder councils that I'd previously found too dry to bother with. I sat quietly and watched Ajin work, and he was extraordinary at it, surgical, patient, a master of making his own position look like the neutral position while guiding every decision toward a predetermined end. He was building something. I could see the architecture of it slowly, the way you could see a building skeleton before the walls went up. He was building a case, not against me specifically, against the precedent I represented. Against the idea that an alpha of Noah's strength could be safely bound to a mate whose family had no political weight, no territorial claim, No independent power. Ajahn believed, and had, I now realized, believed for his entire career, that personal attachments made alphas vulnerable. That love was a security risk. That the highest-ranked wolf in a territory owed his primary loyalty to the pack, and any relationship that diverted that loyalty was, by definition, a threat. He had waited, he had been patient, he had let us bond, let us build a life, let us reach the point of the wedding day. And then, I suddenly understood. He had decided that a public death was more useful to his cause than a private separation. My murder was not about me at all. It was about what my survival would have meant for his vision of pack law and alpha duty. If Noah's foreign blood, low-status mate survived long enough to be bonded at the altar, the precedent was set. Future alphas could choose freely, could love whom they chose, could build packs around emotional truth rather than political calculation. Ajahn couldn't allow that. He had spent 50 years building a different world. I sat with this knowledge for 3 months before I told anyone. I told Noah. We were at the river. I had a feeling about that river, about the honesty it seemed to produce in both of us, and it was 8 months before our wedding date. I told him everything. Not how I knew, exactly. I gave him the shape of what I'd found, the documented evidence I'd spent months quietly gathering, the pattern of council manipulations, the testimony I'd collected from 3 younger elders who had started to feel uncomfortable with Ajahns' direction. Noah listened the way he listened when something was costing him, still, controlled, the only sign of his interior state the slight whitening of his knuckles against his knees. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. You've been carrying this, he said at last. How long? I almost laughed. A while, Elena. I needed to be sure. You don't take down an elder of 50 years standing without being sure. He looked at me with an expression that hurt to meet, not because it was angry but because it was something rawer than anger. Something that looked like the specific grief of loving someone who protects you without letting you know they need protecting. I would have helped you, he said quietly. I know. That's not why I didn't tell you earlier. Then why? I thought about how to answer that. About the wedding dress and the marble floor and the darkness. About waking up in my childhood bedroom with smooth palms and glow stars on the ceiling. About the 5 years I'd spent moving through the world with the weight of a death I was trying to prevent. The way it had made me simultaneously more careful and more reckless, careful with information, reckless with love, because I knew now how quickly everything could end. Because I needed to be the one who saved us, I said. Just once. I needed that. Noah's jaw worked. He reached across the space between us and took my hand. And his grip was the same as it had been on the first day, warm, firm. The current of recognition that ran through me like a second heartbeat. Tell me what you need. From me now, he said. Part 5. The wedding day, October 15th, arrived cold and clear. The cathedral was full. The amber light fell through the stained glass in the exact patterns I remembered. The white dress was the same dress. I had chosen it on purpose. Some superstition about facing the moment that had broken me the first time and walking through it. Unbroken, but Elder Ajahn was not in the cathedral. He had been removed from his position 6 months earlier, quietly and without public spectacle. On the grounds of council manipulation and a documented pattern of policy distortion that 3 elders had come forward to corroborate. He was alive. He was living out his years in a small house on the pack's eastern border, stripped of his title and his influence, guarded but not imprisoned. He had wept when they came for him. Not in regret, I thought. In the particular grief of someone who had believed absolutely in a version of the world that the world had refused to validate. I had not felt as much satisfaction about it as I'd expected to. Standing at the back of the cathedral, waiting for the doors to open, I thought about that. About how the story I'd spent 5 years building toward was not the story I'd thought it was. I'd come back expecting a villain, expecting a twist I could solve, expecting the satisfaction of outmaneuvering a monster. What I'd found was an old man who loved his pack so much he'd become willing to do a monstrous thing in its service. It didn't make what he'd intended to do less monstrous. It made it lonelier. Petri appeared at my shoulder, smoothing the train of my dress, and I looked at my sister, young and fierce and entirely herself, and felt the knot in my chest loosen fractionally. "You look terrified," Petra said. "I'm not terrified. You look like you are. I'm something else," I said, "something that doesn't have a word." Petra studied me with the particular sharpness she'd always had, the quality of attention that had always made me feel both seen and slightly exposed. "You're going to be okay," she said. Not a reassurance. A statement of fact, the way Petra always said things she actually believed. I thought about the first time I walked toward this altar and never arrived. I thought about Noah's face across the cathedral, the moment the joy drained out of it. "I know," I said. "The door's open." The walk down the aisle was the longest and the shortest thing I had ever done. Long because every step was a step I hadn't taken before, in a version of this moment I'd never reached. Short because I'd spent 5 years walking toward it. Noah was at the altar. He was watching me come toward him with the expression he used when something was affecting him more than he wanted to show, the stillness. The controlled precision of a man who'd learned early that his emotions were never entirely private. That whatever he felt would radiate outward through his bond and his rank, and be felt by every wolf in proximity. He contained himself always, carefully, but his eyes weren't contained. His eyes tracked me down the aisle with an openness that had no performance in it. And when I reached him and took his hands and felt that familiar current pass between us, the cathedral and the crowd and the years of memory and grief fell away entirely, and there was only this, the present moment, arrived at and intact, against all probability. "You okay?" he said quietly, low enough that only I could hear it. "Yes," I said. "You look like you've been somewhere far away." I squeezed his hands. I came back. His eyes searched mine for a moment, finding something there that satisfied whatever question he was asking, something that made the careful control in his face ease into the real thing. The private expression, the one that was only ever mine. "Good," Noah said. The elder conducting the ceremony cleared his throat gently. We turned to face him together. Epilogue: What I learned about time. There is a thing that happens to people who carry knowledge forward through time, if such a thing is possible. If the dream I had that morning in my childhood bedroom was more than a dream and the 5 years I lived twice were truly mine to have lived, you can spend all of it watching for the wound that's coming, cataloging threats, measuring distances, calculating who might be the one who turns on you. Or you can do that and also live. I had done both. I had been vigilant and I had been present. I had kept my eyes open and I had also laughed at Cole's terrible jokes and argued with Noah about pack politics I did care about. Actually, now that I knew how much they mattered. I had sat by the river with Marcus in comfortable silence. I had trained with Sable until she stopped being distant and started being, in her quiet and thorny way, fond. I had stayed up late with Daria talking about nothing important. I had called my mother on the days I knew she was lonely even before she said so. I had loved all of it. I had chosen to love all of it, with the full knowledge of what love costs and what it makes possible. The knife had been meant to stop all of it before it could begin. What stopped the knife was 5 years of paying attention, not just to threats, to everything. Noah and I walked out of the cathedral into the October sunlight, and the pack was there, all of them. Hundreds of people who were in various ways my family now, and the sound they made was enormous. And warm and alive. And I tilted my face up to the sky and felt the sun on my skin and thought about the crack in the plaster shaped like a river, the glow stars on a ceiling, a young girl's palm smooth and unscarred and full of time she didn't know yet how to spend. I knew how to spend it now. I pulled Noah down toward me by his lapel and kissed him in front of everyone, and the crowd made an even louder sound. And Cole somewhere in the crowd made a sound that was probably embarrassing. And Marcus was certainly not smiling but was probably close. When I pulled back, Noah was laughing. "Was that necessary?" he said. "Absolutely," I said. He laughed again and tucked me into his side, and we walked forward into the rest of our lives, the ones we were going to get to actually live. Every single ordinary, irreplaceable, terrifying, beloved day of them.